I found the certified letter from Riverside County, wedged in my mailbox on a Tuesday morning that already felt too hot for April. And something about the government seal made my coffee taste bitter before I even opened it. My name is Trevor Westfield, and I have been farming 40 acres in the Temecula Valley for the past 12 years. The land belonged to my grandfather before me, and his father before that. We grew wine grapes mostly, some citrus on the eastern section, and I made enough to live comfortably without having to answer to anyone. At least, that is what I thought, until the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association decided to build their little slice of suburban paradise right up against my property line 5 years ago. The letter was 3 pages of dense legal language, but the core message hit me like a hammer. Every single road in the Sunset Ridge development was built without proper county permits. The county was giving the HOA 90 days to provide documentation proving the roads met county standards, or they would begin demolition proceedings. But here is where it got interesting for me. The main access road to Sunset Ridge, the one called Vintage Hills Boulevard, cut directly through an easement on my property. An easement I had never actually agreed to in writing. I read the letter twice more, standing in my driveway while dust kicked up from the morning wind. The county was threatening to tear up every road in a development of 200 homes because someone at the HOA or the developer had cut corners 6 years ago. And if those roads went away, those 200 families would be landlocked. No access except through my farm. I should have felt concerned. Instead, I felt the first genuine smile cross my face in months. The trouble with the HOA had started small, the way these things always do. A complaint about the smell of manure during fertilizing season. A formal letter about my irrigation runoff supposedly affecting their landscaping. Then came the big one last summer when Margaret Pemberton, the HOA president, tried to cite me for having agricultural equipment visible from the street. My street. The county road that existed 40 years before her pristine neighborhood. Margaret was everything you would expect. 53 years old, blonde highlights that cost more than my monthly water bill, and a voice that could strip paint when she got worked up. She drove a white Mercedes SUV that she parked diagonally across 2 spaces at the grocery store, and she had opinions about everything from property values to what color I should paint my barn. Spoiler alert, I never painted the barn. I tucked the letter into my shirt pocket and finished my coffee looking out over the vineyard. The grapes were just starting to bud, small green promises of the harvest to come. Beyond my property line, I could see the terracotta roofs of Sunset Ridge, all matching in that planned community way that made every house look like it came from the same factory. The morning sun glinted off solar panels and swimming pools. It looked peaceful. But I knew that letter was probably sitting in 200 other mailboxes right now, and peace was about to become a memory. My phone rang around 10 that morning. I was out checking the irrigation lines in the north field when I saw the unknown number. Normally, I would let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Trevor Westfield," I said. "Mr. Westfield, this is Richard Chen from the Riverside County Department of Public Works." His voice was professional but tired. "I am calling to follow up on the notice you received regarding the Sunset Ridge development. Just read it this morning," I said. "Hell of a situation." "That is one way to put it." I heard papers shuffling. "Mr. Westfield, our records show that the main access road to Sunset Ridge utilizes an easement across your property. However, we cannot locate any recorded easement agreement in the county files. Do you have documentation of this easement?" I leaned against my truck, watching a hawk circle overhead. No, sir, I do not, because I never signed one. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that I checked if the call had dropped. Mr. Westfield, Richard finally said, are you telling me that road was built across your property without your permission? That is exactly what I am telling you. More silence. Then, we are going to need to meet. Are you available tomorrow morning? We agreed on 9 o'clock at the county offices in Riverside. I spent the rest of the day working the fields, but my mind was already 3 steps ahead. If there was no easement, the HOA had been trespassing on my property for 5 years. And if the county tore up that road, the HOA would need to negotiate with me for access. The same HOA that had spent the last 2 years making my life difficult over every petty regulation they could dream up. I am not a vindictive man by nature. Farming teaches you patience, teaches you that nature has its own timeline and you cannot force things. But Margaret Pemberton had tested that patience to its limits. Just last month she had called county code enforcement on me because my rooster was crowing too early in the morning. We live in a rural area. Roosters crow. That is what they do. The code enforcement officer had been apologetic but still had to come out and do an inspection, wasting both our time. That evening I dug through my grandfather's old files in the barn office. He had kept meticulous records, every property document going back to the 1960s. I found the original surveys, the deed, the water rights documentation, nothing about any easement. I did find a letter from 6 years ago from a company called Prestige Development Group. It was addressed to my grandfather, who had still been alive then but already deep in the dementia that would take him a year later. The letter was dense with legal language, but it essentially requested permission to survey my property for possible access routes. There was no mention of actually building anything. That letter had never been answered. 3 months later, according to the date stamp, construction on Vintage Hills Boulevard had begun anyway. I made copies of everything and put them in a folder for the morning meeting. The Riverside County offices were busy when I arrived. People streaming in and out dealing with permits and violations, and all the bureaucratic necessities of modern life. Richard Chen met me in the lobby, a man in his 40s with sharp eyes and the slightly rumpled look of someone who had already been working for 3 hours. We shook hands, and he led me to a small conference room. "Thank you for coming in," Richard said, spreading out a large survey map across the table. "I want to make sure I understand the situation completely before this gets more complicated." He pointed to the map, where my property was outlined in blue and the Sunset Ridge development in red. Vintage Hills Boulevard was a yellow line that clearly crossed my land for about 200 feet. "This is the only viable access road to the development," Richard explained. "There is a secondary emergency access here," he pointed to the eastern edge, "but it connects to Via Verde, which is also unpermitted. Mr. Westfield, I have been doing this job for 15 years, and I have never seen anything quite this egregious." The developer somehow managed to complete an entire 200-home subdivision without getting a single road properly permitted through the county. "How is that even possible?" I asked. Richard rubbed his temples. "That is what we are trying to figure out." The developer, Prestige Development Group, filed preliminary plans back in 2017. Those plans showed the roads, but they never went through the full permitting process. Somehow the grading permits were approved without the road construction permits. Then the building permits for the houses were approved based on the assumption the roads were permitted. It is a cascade of failures at multiple levels. "And now," I asked, "now Prestige Development Group is bankrupt." They finished the development, sold all the homes, and dissolved the company in 2022. The responsibility for the roads fell to the HOA, which apparently did not realize they were sitting on unpermitted infrastructure. Richard looked at me directly. But your situation is separate. If you never granted an easement, that road is not just unpermitted. It is also trespassing on your property. What happens if the county tears up the roads? I asked. The residents would be landlocked unless they can establish legal access. The HOA would need to either get the roads properly permitted, which would require your agreement for the easement, or they would need to find an alternative access route. Given the geography, there really is not one. Richard paused. Mr. Westfield, this is going to get ugly. The HOA is going to argue they have prescriptive rights to the easement based on open and continuous use. You are going to need a lawyer. Already planning on it, I said. By the time I got back to my farm, there were 3 messages on my phone. 2 were from reporters who had somehow already gotten wind of the story. The 3rd was from Margaret Pemberton, and her voice could have frozen gasoline. Mr. Westfield, this is Margaret Pemberton, president of the Sunset Ridge HOA. We need to speak immediately regarding the access road situation. Call me back at this number. I deleted the message and called my lawyer instead. Tom Harrison had handled my grandfather's estate and helped me with various farm business issues over the years. He was 60 years old, had grown up in the valley, and had no patience for HOA nonsense. When I explained the situation, he actually laughed. "Trevor, do you understand what kind of leverage you have right now?" Tom said. "If that road is on your property without permission, you can demand compensation, deny them access, or negotiate pretty much anything you want." "I mainly just want them to leave me alone," I said. "Oh, I think we can arrange that," Tom said. "Let me make some calls." Do not talk to anyone from the HOA without me present, and definitely do not talk to reporters yet. That evening, I was fixing a broken sprinkler head in the vineyard when I heard a vehicle coming up my driveway. The white Mercedes SUV kicked up dust as it approached, and I knew my quiet day was over. Margaret Pemberton got out of her car wearing what I assumed was her power outfit: cream-colored pantsuit, heels that had no business being on a farm, oversized sunglasses. She was flanked by 2 other people I recognized from HOA meetings I had been forced to attend. One was Robert Chen, the HOA vice president, and no relation to Richard from the county, a thin man in his 50s who worked in commercial real estate. The other was Diane Fuller, the HOA secretary, a woman in her 40s who always seemed nervous. "Mr. Westfield," Margaret called out, picking her way across the dirt carefully, "we need to talk about this easement situation." I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans. "My lawyer said I should not talk to you without him present." Margaret's face tightened. "This does not need to be adversarial. We are neighbors. We should be able to work this out like adults." "Like adults," I said. "Margaret, you have been harassing me for 2 years over every tiny thing you can think of. You tried to cite me for storing my tractor where I store my tractor, on my property. Now you show up here because you need something from me, and suddenly we are supposed to be friendly neighbors." "That is all water under the bridge," Margaret said, waving her hand dismissively. "This is a much bigger issue. We have 200 families who need access to their homes. Surely you understand we need to work together on this." "What I understand," I said, "is that someone built a road across my property without asking me. That seems like a problem the HOA needs to solve, not me." Robert stepped forward. "Mr. Westfield, be reasonable. That road has been there for 5 years. We have established use. Any court would grant us a prescriptive easement." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe not. I guess we will find out." Margaret's voice went cold. "You are making a mistake. This community has resources and lawyers. We can make this very difficult for you." "Madam, you are standing on my property threatening me," I said quietly. "I think you should leave now." For a moment I thought Margaret might actually explode, her face flushing red, but Deanne touched her arm and whispered something. The three of them retreated to the Mercedes, Margaret's heels punching little holes in the dirt with each angry step. As they drove away, I realized this was just the beginning. The story hit the local news 2 days later. The Temecula Tribune ran it on the front page. "County threatens to demolish roads in Sunset Ridge development." By that afternoon, it had been picked up by the regional stations, and by evening it was on the local TV news. A reporter named Sarah Kim from Channel 7 actually drove out to my farm with a camera crew. Against Tom's initial advice, I agreed to a brief interview. Sometimes getting ahead of the story is better than hiding from it. "Mr. Westfield, how did you discover there was no easement for the road?" Sarah asked, holding a microphone while the camera focused on us with my vineyard in the background. "I got the same letter from the county that everyone else did," I said. "When I checked my property records, there was nothing about an easement. No one ever asked my permission to build that road." "The HOA is claiming they have rights to the road based on 5 years of use. What do you say to that?" "I say that using something without permission for 5 years does not make it legal. If I started parking my truck in Margaret Pemberton's driveway every day for 5 years, I do not think she would consider it my parking spot." That quote made the evening broadcast and went minor viral on social media. My phone started ringing nonstop. The next day, Tom and I met with the HOA's legal team at a neutral office in Temecula. The HOA had hired a firm from Los Angeles, 3 lawyers in expensive suits who spread documents across the conference table like battle plans. The lead lawyer was named Patricia Simmons, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the demeanor of someone who was used to winning. "Gentlemen, let's cut through the noise. My clients are willing to offer Mr. Westfield $50,000 for a permanent easement across his property for Vintage Hills Boulevard. That is more than fair compensation." Tom did not even open his folder. $50,000. Miss Simmons, that road provides access to a development of 200 homes. Without it, every single one of those properties loses most of its value. We both know what is actually at stake here. Patricia's expression did not change. "Mr. Harrison, let's be realistic. Our position is that a prescriptive easement has already been established. The road has been in continuous, open use for over 5 years without objection from Mr. Westfield. We are offering compensation as a courtesy, not because we believe we are legally required to." "Your client built that road while my client's grandfather was suffering from advanced dementia," Tom countered. "The property owner was not mentally competent to object. That breaks the continuity of your prescriptive easement claim. We have medical records to prove it." I watched Patricia's confidence flicker for just a moment. That had been Tom's idea, and it was brilliant. Prescriptive easement required that the property owner was aware and able to object, but did not. My grandfather's condition meant he could not have objected even if he wanted to. "We would need to see those medical records," Patricia said. "You will see them in court," Tom replied. "Now let me tell you what my client wants. First, the HOA will formally apologize for the harassment over the past 2 years and will dismiss all outstanding complaints filed against Mr. Westfield. Second, the HOA will pay $300,000 for a permanent easement. Third, the HOA will pay all costs for proper environmental studies and permitting for that easement. Fourth, The easement agreement will explicitly state that the HOA has no authority over Mr. Westfield's property or agricultural operations. Patricia actually laughed. 300,000. That is absurd. Is it? Tom said. Because I did some quick math. 200 homes, average value probably around 600,000 each. That is $120 million in property value. If those homes become landlocked, values drop by what? 50% more. 300,000 is a bargain. The meeting ended with no agreement, but I could see the calculation happening behind Patricia's eyes. This was not going to be a quick win for the HOA. Over the next week, things escalated in ways I had not expected. Someone started a petition in the neighborhood calling for the county to force me to grant access. It got over 500 signatures, including people who did not even live in Sunset Ridge. The local Facebook groups became war zones, with people calling me everything from a greedy farmer to an enemy of community values. Margaret Pemberton went on the local news and cried. Actual tears. Talking about families with children who might lose their homes, about the elderly residents who would be trapped, about the injustice of one man holding an entire community hostage. It was effective. I started getting hate mail. Someone spray painted greedy on my mailbox. A group of residents staged a protest at the end of my driveway, holding signs like "Farms need neighbors too," and "Don't destroy our community." The irony of them protesting on my property was apparently lost on them. Through it all, I kept working. The grapes needed attention regardless of legal drama. The irrigation system did not care about HOA politics. I was out in the vineyard when Tom called with news. "Trevor, we have got a problem," he said. The HOA filed an emergency motion asking the court to grant them temporary access across your property while the legal issues get sorted out. They are claiming irreparable harm if access is cut off. Can they do that? I asked. They can try. We have a hearing in 3 days. The good news is the judge is Sandra Ortega, and she is sharp. She will not be swayed by theatrics, but we need to be prepared for them to bring residents to testify about hardship. The hearing was held in Riverside County Superior Court on a Monday morning. The gallery was packed with Sunset Ridge residents, many wearing matching blue T-shirts that said, "Save our community." Margaret sat in the front row, flanked by her lawyers. Judge Ortega was a woman in her early 60s with dark hair pulled back severely and eyes that missed nothing. She listened to Patricia Simmons lay out the HOA's case for emergency relief, including testimony from a young mother who talked about not being able to get her kids to school if the road was closed, and an elderly man who described his fear of not being able to reach the hospital if he had a medical emergency. It was compelling, I had to admit. These were real people with real concerns, even if the situation was not my fault. Then it was Tom's turn. He stood up slowly, adjusting his glasses. "Your Honor, my client has deep sympathy for the residents of Sunset Ridge. What happened here is a tragedy of incompetence and corner cutting by a developer and an HOA that did not do its due diligence. But that tragedy does not become my client's responsibility to fix on someone else's timeline." Tom pulled out a thick folder. "I want to enter into Evidence Exhibit A, a series of complaints filed by the Sunset Ridge HOA against my client over the past 2 years. Complaints about agricultural smells, complaints about equipment storage, complaints about a rooster crowing, complaints about the color of his barn. 18 separate complaints, Your Honor, all of them either dismissed or found to have no merit." Judge Ortega took the folder and began flipping through it, her expression darkening. "The HOA spent 2 years making my client's life miserable," Tom continued. "They cited him for violations that did not exist. They called code enforcement to his farm repeatedly. And now, when they need something from him, they ask the court to force him to give it to them for free. That is not how property rights work in this country. Mr. Harrison makes a good point, Judge Ortega said, looking at Patricia. Miss Simmons, why should this court grant your client emergency relief when they spent considerable time and resources harassing the very person they now need cooperation from? Patricia stood quickly. Your Honor, those complaints were legitimate concerns about property values and community standards. They have nothing to do with the current emergency situation regarding access. They have everything to do with it, Judge Ortega said sharply. They demonstrate a pattern of antagonistic behavior by your client toward Mr. Westfield. You are asking for equitable relief while your client's hands are far from clean. She closed the folder. Motion denied. The HOA has 90 days to negotiate an easement with Mr. Westfield or find alternative access. If they cannot reach an agreement, we will have a full hearing on the prescriptive easement claim. But I will not force a property owner to grant emergency access to an entity that has spent 2 years trying to regulate his lawful activities off his own land. The courtroom erupted. Residents began shouting. Margaret's face went white, then red. The judge banged her gavel and threatened to clear the room. As we walked out of the courthouse, a group of angry residents surrounded us. Tom had to physically step in front of me as a man in his 30s started screaming about property values and lawsuits. You are destroying our lives. The man yelled, We have mortgages. We have families. Then you should be yelling at your HOA, I said. They are the ones who built a road without permission. That quote, unfortunately, also made the news. The pressure increased dramatically after the hearing. The Temecula City Council held a special session about the Sunset Ridge situation, even though it was technically a county issue. Local politicians started calling for regulatory changes. A state assemblyman named Marcus Rodriguez gave an interview saying that California needed stronger protections against situations like this, where one property owner could hold an entire community hostage. I got interviewed by 3 more news outlets. One was a disaster where the reporter clearly thought I was the villain. Another was surprisingly fair, actually looking into how the developer had managed to skip so many steps. The third was from a national real estate website that focused on HOA issues, and they treated me like a folk hero standing up against HOA overreach. Through all of this, the county was doing its own investigation. Richard Chen called me one evening with an update. Trevor, we have been digging into the permitting history and it gets worse, he said. We found evidence that someone at the developer actually forged a county inspector's signature on road completion documents. The roads were never inspected at all. We are talking potential criminal fraud. What does that mean for the situation now? I asked. It means even if the HOA pays you for an easement, those roads still need to be brought up to county standards or torn up and rebuilt. We are talking millions of dollars in work. The HOA's insurance might cover some of it, but this is going to bankrupt their reserves at minimum. I thanked him for the information and sat on my porch watching the sunset. In the distance, I could see lights coming on in Sunset Ridge, families settling in for the evening with no idea that their entire development was sitting on fraudulent infrastructure. The next day, Margaret Pemberton showed up at my farm again, but this time she was alone and in a regular sedan instead of the Mercedes. She looked tired, older somehow, as she got out of the car. Can we talk? She asked. Just the 2 of us, no lawyers. Against my better judgment, I nodded and led her to my porch. I got us both glasses of water and sat down. I need you to understand something, Margaret said, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. I am not a bad person. I know you think I am after everything that has happened. But I moved to Sunset Ridge because I wanted to live somewhere nice and orderly. My whole life has been chaos. Bad marriage, bankruptcy, starting over at 50. That development represented stability to me. And yes, I enforced the rules strictly, but that was because I believed in protecting what we built there. You did not build anything, I said quietly. A developer built it, cut corners, and disappeared, and you spent 2 years taking out your need for control on me. Margaret looked down at her hands. You are right, I did, and I am sorry. I am genuinely sorry, Trevor. The HOA board is falling apart. Robert wants to resign. Deanne has not returned my calls in 3 days. Our insurance company is denying coverage for the road issues because the underlying permits were fraudulent. We just found out the developer never established proper drainage either, so during heavy rains half the development floods. It is all falling apart. What do you want from me? I asked. I want to know what it will take for you to give us that easement, Margaret said. Not what your lawyer wants. What you want. I thought about it while a hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals in the evening air. I want all those complaints dismissed, and a written apology from the HOA board, I said. I want $200,000 for the permanent easement. I want it in writing that the HOA has zero authority over my property and cannot file any complaints against my agricultural operations. And I want it in writing that if anyone from the HOA harasses me in the future, the easement can be revoked. Margaret nodded slowly. That is more reasonable than what your lawyer asked for. Tom was negotiating. I am just telling you what would make this right. I will take it to the board, Margaret said. But Trevor, even if we agree to all of that, the county still might tear up the roads. We might not have enough money to rebuild them properly. That is not my problem to solve, I said. She left without another word, and I went back to my evening routine of checking the irrigation timers and locking up the equipment barn. 2 days later, Tom called with news that the HOA board had agreed to my terms. We set up a meeting to sign the paperwork, with both legal teams present to make it official. The signing took place at Tom's office in Temecula. Margaret was there with Robert, and a new person I did not recognize who had apparently replaced Deanne as secretary. The lawyers had prepared a 20-page easement agreement that spelled out every detail. I read through it carefully while everyone waited. The terms were exactly what I had asked for. $200,000, permanent easement for Vintage Hills Boulevard only, no HOA authority over my property, enforceable harassment clause. Tom had also added a provision that the HOA was responsible for all maintenance of the road section crossing my property, and that they had to carry liability insurance naming me as additionally insured. This works, I said, and signed on the designated lines. Margaret signed for the HOA. The lawyers notarized everything. The check was handed over. Just like that, a 2-month fight was over, but the larger problem remained. Even with the easement secured, the county still needed proof that the roads met safety standards, and the more the county investigated, the worse it looked. 3 weeks after I signed the easement agreement, Richard Chen released a preliminary report on the Sunset Ridge infrastructure. It was devastating. Not a single road met county standards for load-bearing capacity. The drainage system was inadequate and improperly graded. Several roads were already showing signs of failure with cracks and settling. Most damning, the report found evidence that the developer had used substandard materials and had not built the roads to the depth required by county code. The estimate to bring everything up to standard was $8.3 million. The HOA had about $400,000 in reserves. That evening, I was watching the news when my phone rang. It was Richard from the county. "Trevor, I wanted to give you a heads up," he said. "We are moving forward with enforcement action. The HOA has 30 days to submit a remediation plan and proof of funding. If they cannot, we are going to have to start closure procedures on the non-compliant roads." "All of them?" I asked. "Every single one. The only road that might be salvageable is Vintage Hills Boulevard, ironically, because it was built on more stable ground across your property. But the internal roads in the development are all failing. What happens to the residents?" "That is the question everyone is asking," Richard said with a sigh. "Legally, the county is not responsible for developer fraud, but we have 200 families living there. We cannot just leave them stranded. There are discussions about some kind of emergency assessment district, where the county floats bonds to fix the roads and then assesses the property owners to pay it back over 20 years. But that would add about $40,000 to every homeowner's tax burden." I thanked him for the call and sat there processing the magnitude of the disaster. This had gone so far beyond my dispute with the HOA. Real people, families who had bought homes in good faith, were about to be financially destroyed. The next day, an investigative reporter from the Los Angeles Times came out to interview me. Her name was Jennifer Elwood, and she had been covering the story of HOA and developer fraud across California. She was in her late 30s, sharp and thorough in her questions. "Mr. Westfield, you have been painted as both a villain and a hero in this situation," Jennifer said as we walked through my vineyard. "How do you see yourself?" "I see myself as a farmer who got caught in someone else's mess," I said. "I did not build roads without permits. I did not harass my neighbors. I just wanted to be left alone to farm my land. But you did leverage the situation for $200,000. "I leveraged my legal rights," I corrected. "The HOA spent 2 years making my life difficult over petty complaints. When they needed something from me, I made sure I was compensated fairly and protected from future harassment. That is not villainous. That is just smart." Jennifer's article came out the following week and was surprisingly balanced. She detailed the history of how Prestige Development Group had systematically defrauded the county and future homeowners. She found 2 other developments in Southern California where the same company had pulled similar stunts before going bankrupt. She interviewed county officials who admitted their permitting process had failed, and she talked to residents of Sunset Ridge who were now facing financial ruin. The article also mentioned that I had been harassed by the HOA before any of this came to light, which helped shift public opinion somewhat. The hate mail slowed down. The spray paint on my mailbox got cleaned off by a couple of teenagers from the development who apologized profusely, saying they had not understood the full situation, but the core problem remained unsolved. The HOA could not afford to fix the roads. The county was not going to back down on enforcement, and 200 families were stuck in the middle. Then something unexpected happened. A town hall meeting was organized at Temecula Valley High School to discuss solutions. I did not plan to attend, figuring it would just be angry residents yelling at county officials. But Tom convinced me that showing my face would help demonstrate I was not the enemy. The auditorium was packed, easily 500 people. County supervisors sat on stage along with the county council and Richard Chen. Margaret was there with the HOA board. News cameras lined the back wall. The meeting started with the county presenting their findings and explaining why enforcement was necessary. Several residents stood up to vent their frustration and fear. One woman broke down crying while describing how she had put her entire life savings into her home and now faced losing everything. Then a man I had never seen before stood up. He was in his 60s, silver hair, wearing a windbreaker and jeans. He introduced himself as Paul Morty, a retired civil engineer who lived in Sunset Ridge. "I have been reviewing the county reports," Paul said, his voice carrying across the auditorium. "And I have been working with some of the other residents who have construction and engineering backgrounds. We think there might be a solution that does not cost $8 million. The room went silent. Even the county officials leaned forward. "The county's estimate assumes we need to tear up all the roads and rebuild from scratch," Paul continued. "But what if we do not need to? What if we can stabilize and repair the existing roads, bring them up to code standards through remediation rather than replacement? I have done preliminary calculations, and I believe we could do it for about $2.5 million. Still a lot of money, but manageable." Richard Chen spoke up from the stage. "Mr. Morty, the county would need to see detailed engineering plans and proof that the remediation would meet our standards." "I know," Paul said, "and I am prepared to put together a team of volunteers to develop those plans, but we need the county's cooperation. We need you to work with us, not against us." One of the county supervisors, a woman named Elena Martinez, nodded thoughtfully. "The county's interest is public safety, not punishing residents for a developer's fraud. If you can present a viable plan, we will review it fairly." That moment shifted the energy in the room. Instead of a fight, it became a discussion about possibilities. After the meeting, I was approached by Paul Morty and a group of other residents. "Mr. Westfield," Paul said, extending his hand, "I wanted to thank you. That surprised me." "Thank me for what?" "For not caving," Paul said. "When this first broke, a lot of us were angry at you, but you forced us to confront the real problem. The HOA had gotten complacent and had never verified that our infrastructure was legitimate. If this had not come to light now, in 5 years those roads would have failed completely. People could have been hurt. So thank you for standing your ground." We shook hands, and I realized that maybe some good was coming from all of this chaos after all. Over the next 2 months, Paul's volunteer engineering team worked around the clock. They surveyed every road, tested soil samples, and developed a comprehensive remediation plan. The county reviewed it and, with some modifications, approved it. The final cost estimate was $2.8 million. The HOA held a special assessment vote. Every homeowner would be assessed $14,000, payable over 10 years with low-interest financing arranged through a local credit union. It passed with 83% approval, with most residents recognizing they had no better option. But there was still the question of where the money came from upfront. The HOA did not have it, and the credit union needed security before approving the financing. That is when the district attorney's office announced they were filing criminal charges against 3 individuals connected to Prestige Development Group. They had tracked down the former CEO, the head of development, and the project manager who had forged the inspection documents. Grand jury indictments were handed down for fraud, forgery, and reckless endangerment. More importantly, the DA's office had identified assets that could be seized. Prestige Development Group might be bankrupt, but the individuals who ran it had moved money around before the company dissolved. The DA estimated they could recover about $1.2 million through asset forfeiture. The Sunset Ridge HOA sued the individuals as well, filing a civil case seeking damages. With criminal charges pending, their lawyers advised settling. The HOA secured another $800,000 in a settlement agreement. Between the recovered funds, the HOA's reserves, and the special assessment, they had enough to start work. The road remediation began in late July. Crews worked through the summer, stabilizing foundations, improving drainage, and bringing everything up to code. Paul Morty essentially worked a full-time volunteer job managing the project, making sure every dollar was spent efficiently. I watched the work from my farm, seeing trucks and equipment moving through Sunset Ridge daily. My check for $200,000 had cleared months ago. The HOA had not filed a single complaint against me since the agreement was signed. Life had returned to something resembling normal. In August, Margaret Pemberton stopped by my farm one last time. She was no longer HOA president, having resigned after the easement agreement was signed. She looked different, more relaxed somehow. "I am moving," she told me as we stood by my vineyard. "Selling my place in Sunset Ridge and buying a condo in San Diego, closer to my daughter." "Probably for the best," I said. "Probably," she agreed. "Trevor, I never properly apologized to you. Not really. I was so focused on control and order that I lost sight of being a decent neighbor. What I did, those complaints and harassment, that was wrong. I am truly sorry." "Apology accepted," I said. "We all make mistakes. Some bigger than others," Margaret said with a sad smile. "For what it is worth, you handled this better than I would have. You could have crushed us, but you did not." "I am a farmer," I said. "We think long-term. Salting the earth never helps anyone." She left after that, and I heard later that her house sold quickly despite everything. The new owners were a young couple with a baby, excited about the updated roads and improved infrastructure. The road project finished in October, just as the grape harvest began. The county conducted final inspections, and for the first time since it was built, Sunset Ridge had fully permitted, code-compliant roads. Paul Morty and his team were celebrated at a neighborhood barbecue that I was actually invited to but politely declined. The criminal trials for the Prestige Development Group executives happened over the following year. The CEO pleaded guilty to fraud and got 3 years in federal prison plus restitution. The head of development got 2 years. The project manager who forged the documents got 18 months and had his professional engineering license permanently revoked. Their cases were used as examples in new California legislation that passed requiring more rigorous oversight of HOA infrastructure and developer accountability. The Sunset Ridge Law, as it became known informally, mandated that counties verify all infrastructure permits before allowing certificate of occupancy for any new development. It was not perfect, but it would hopefully prevent future situations like this. As for me, life returned to the rhythm of farming. The $200,000 went into my farm improvement fund. I upgraded my irrigation system and bought a new tractor. The grapes that year produced an excellent harvest, and I sold them to one of the better local wineries for a good price. The new HOA board, led by Paul Morty, who had been elected president, maintained a respectful distance. They sent me a Christmas card that year thanking me for my patience during the crisis. I sent them a bottle of wine from my grapes. On a quiet evening in December, I sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. The vineyard was dormant for winter, the vines bare but already holding the promise of next year's growth. In the distance, I could see Sunset Ridge, lights twinkling as families settled in for the night on their newly safe and legal roads. Tom called to check in, telling me that someone at the county had nominated me for some kind of community service award, which I politely declined. I was not interested in awards or recognition. I had just wanted to farm my land in peace. The next morning, I was up at dawn checking on the new irrigation system when I heard a vehicle coming up my driveway. For a brief moment, old anxiety flared, but it was just the mail carrier with a package. As I walked back to the house, I looked out over the 40 acres that my grandfather had farmed and his father before him. The land had weathered droughts and floods, economic booms and busts, and now HOA drama. It would still be here long after all of us were gone, growing grapes and citrus under the California sun. The whole situation had taught me something valuable about standing your ground while still trying to do right by people. About the difference between revenge and reasonable compensation. About how disasters sometimes force people to work together and build something better than what existed before. I never did paint that barn, by the way. It stands there still, weathered gray wood that Margaret Pemberton once found so offensive. But the new HOA president complimented it last month, saying it added character to the area and reminded everyone of the valley's agricultural heritage. Life has a funny way of working things out. The Sunset Ridge development still stands, 200 homes filled with families living their lives. The roads are safe and solid now, properly built and maintained. The HOA runs smoothly under Paul's leadership, focused on actual community needs instead of petty complaints. And my farm continues its work, season after season, growing food and wine in the good earth. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had just signed that easement immediately, taken whatever they offered, and avoided the whole fight. The roads would still be failing, waiting to cause a catastrophe. The developer fraud would never have been exposed. The county permitting failures would have continued unchecked. In a strange way, my stubbornness and the HOA's prior harassment led to something better for everyone. The residents got safe infrastructure. The county improved its systems. And I got fair compensation plus peace and quiet to run my farm. As spring approached and the vines began to bud again, I found myself cautiously optimistic about the future. My relationship with my neighbors had evolved from hostile to neutral to something approaching friendly. Paul stopped by occasionally to talk about local politics or ask advice about dealing with county bureaucracy. Other residents waved when they drove past on the county road. It was not perfect, but it was progress. One particularly warm March afternoon, I was working on repairing a section of fence along the property line when a family from Sunset Ridge came walking along the road. Parents with 2 kids, maybe 8 and 10 years old. "Excuse me," the father called out. "Are you Mr. Westfield?" I wiped sweat from my forehead and nodded. "We just moved here last month," he said. "I wanted to introduce myself. I am David. This is my wife Sarah and our kids Emma and Josh. We heard about everything that happened, and I wanted to say thank you for not letting the HOA push you around. Because of you standing firm, we bought into a development with solid infrastructure." "Just protecting my property," I said. "Well, we appreciate it," Sarah added. "Also, do you sell any of your produce directly? We would love to buy local." I ended up selling them a box of citrus from my eastern grove and gave the kids each an orange to eat on their walk home. As I watched them go, laughing and talking as a family, I realized that this was what community actually meant. Not matching houses and strict rules, but people treating each other with basic decency and respect. The legal saga had one final chapter that came later that spring. The county issued an official report on the Sunset Ridge situation, documenting all the failures and lessons learned. They sent me a copy with a letter from the Board of Supervisors thanking me for my cooperation during the process, and noting that my insistence on proper legal procedures had ultimately protected public safety. That letter sits framed in my barn office now, not out of pride but as a reminder. A reminder that sometimes doing the right thing is not the same as doing the easy thing. That standing your ground does not mean being cruel. that problems caused by other people are not automatically your responsibility to fix, but how you respond says something about who you are. The vineyard is looking good this year. The vines are healthy, the spring rains were just right, and barring any disasters, we should have an excellent harvest. I have already lined up buyers for the grapes, local wineries that produce quality wines from valley fruit. My rooster still crows at dawn. My tractor still sits in plain view of the road. My barn is still unpainted weathered wood, and not a single person has complained about any of it. Sometimes the best ending is not dramatic or satisfying in a movie sense. It is just quiet return to normal life with problems solved and lessons learned. The farm continues its work. The seasons turn. The grapes grow, and that, I suppose, is enough.